Hello, everybody. Welcome to the eDiscovery channel. As always, I'm Rocky Messing, and here joined with Tom O'Connor, who once again, as always, has a hurricane on its way to meet him and greet him.
Can you believe it? Can you believe? I looked at the thing this morning and I said, no, this can't even be real.
Yeah.
This thing is like, it was in the lower Caribbean. It was turning towards Guatemala. It went to Guatemala, did a 180, is now going to Cuba. It's going to come off Cuba and do a 90-degree out into the Gulf of Mexico. Again. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
It's one of those, it's 2020. What do you expect?
Yeah, exactly.
But today, you will notice that it is just me and Tom, or Tom and I, because today we are doing a very special episode of the Tom and Rocky Chat, where we're going to tell a couple stories, hear a little bit about someone who is very special to obviously all of us, but obviously to Tom. Talk a little bit about Gayle. For those of you who don't know, Tom and Gayle were married for how many years?
Seemed like about 100. We were married in 1989. I'm no mathematician, so you folks will have to figure that out. But we had been together for 6 or 7 years before that, before she finally she reeled me in.
She caught you.
Yeah.
Or more like you caught her, because yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was no doubt about which one was stepping up there.
Yeah. There's a remarkable, I say it a lot, but I don't know if you knew Thad Warren. He worked with Shimmy.
Yeah.
And I got to meet him the first time at a Legal Tech New York soiree, and Gayle was there, and she's talking to me, and being Gayle, and she wanders away, and Thad goes, "Who is that?" And I said, "That's my wife." And he goes, "No, seriously, who was that?" I'm pointing to that platinum blonde with the 12-inch heels and the fur coat. I said, "That's my wife." And he looks at me, and he looks at her, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Brother, I think you outkicked your coverage there."
That for sure.
He was not far from wrong. Not far from wrong.
So, for anyone who is not aware, unfortunately, we lost Gayle about 2 weeks ago, and we wanted to take some time to just tell over a couple stories, and Tom's going to regale us with some of her finer events and finer details about her life, her career, because a lot of people recognize that flamboyant, out there, 12-inch heels, crazy dancing on the tables, but actually Gayle was a mover and a shaker in the e-discovery industry, and we wanted to let people in on a little bit of insight about her and hear a little bit about her life and her career. So, Tom, why don't you start us off with a little bit about how when you guys met?
Well,
I'll let you take it from there.
When we met, Gayle was a cocktail waitress at a joint. I had just moved to Seattle, and she, by complete coincidence, was working and had been there for a while at a place that was about 2 blocks from the apartment that I was in, and so it was the closest bar to where I lived. I finished the day and I stopped in the bar and have a couple of drinks, and I hated her. Couldn't stand her. She was the same Gayle, the flamboyant, and I used to drink, at the time I was drinking shots of peppermint schnapps and a draft beer, and I'd have a newspaper or something from the day, and I'm wearing a suit, I'm being Mr. Professional, and Gayle was being Gayle. And she would see me go, and I'd always sit at the bar because I didn't want to sit at a table where she would wait on me. And
avoidance, good strategy.
And she would yell out, of course, as soon as she saw me, "Hey, it's Mr. Hops and Schnapps." I remember saying to the bartender, "Who the hell is that?" And he goes, "Oh, that's Gayle." He's like oh, everybody knows it's Gayle. That
Yep.
explained it.
All you need to know.
Yeah. So that's how we met. And then it went from there. But it's interesting because this came up. We were talking about the second line that we did and the celebration of life we did for her in New Orleans, and different people who knew her knew different sides of her. Her family, of course, knew the crazy Gayle from day one, and knew that she was a professional, but didn't really know what she did or how she did it. Hang on a second. Are you picking up that noise?
I'm hearing it, but
Yeah.
we're good.
It's trash day. Yep, it's trash day. Sorry. That's just part of living in New Orleans.
It happens everywhere.
Yeah. Well, luckily it happens regularly here. It didn't used to, but that's a different story. I just finished reading an interview this morning, actually over my coffee, with Bruce Springsteen and his new album. It's called Letter to You, and it's about death and the end of chapters and saying goodbye to people, and as he says, the song is called "I'll See You in My Dreams." He said he makes a statement that people are not just their physical thing. When they die, the physical part leaves us, but he really believes that their spirit. He said the spirit is with you when they're alive. You know about people like Gayle who are full of life, who are full of a spirit. And he said, and I truly believe that some of that lingers, and you may see some of that in your dreams or somehow come into contact with it. And he said, and so he ends the album with a song called "I'll See You in My Dreams," and he talks about chapters in life. He said, I came across somehow the other day. I found myself listening to a song I did when I was like 27, and he said, and I realized that was a chapter of my life. I lived that. I did those albums. I did those songs. It's over. He said, I just finished another chapter in my life. My kids are all grown now. And Patty, his wife, Patty Scalfa, the musician, he said, we're starting, which probably going to be the last chapter of our life, which is just the two of us together and enjoying what we're doing and writing music. And I thought, yeah, that's true. Gayle had very distinct chapters. She and I were just embarking on that last chapter. We had, been interrupted by COVID, like so many people. We had planned to go to Paris back in May and put that off, of course, and we're going to go next year. And we're working a little bit less. We're being a little bit more selective in the work we were doing, so we could travel and kind of enjoy being in New Orleans, the city of fun. And and so
how long were you guys in New Orleans?
Well, I've been here. We had an apartment here. Oh my goodness, since about 2000, because we both traveled so much. I actually came here the year after I got sober, about 6 months after I got sober, 1991. I came down. Summation sent me down to do a big install for a week, and I fell in love with the city. And Gayle, it was the first city I came to where my landmarks weren't bars. If you would ask me, about Chicago or Boston or DC, I would name, 10 bars.
Right.
In New Orleans, I got to know the city. So we rented a little studio apartment in the quarter so that when we were traveling, often alone, one of us could stop and have the apartment. And then we would come down for Mardi Gras. We joined a crew, the crew of Tucks, and rode in a Mardi Gras parade. I moved here full time in 2006, right after the storm, because the ABA was heavily involved with getting the legal community back, and they knew that I knew people down here and asked me to do that. So I rented another full-time apartment. And Gayle moved here. She at the time was working in San Diego for Case Logistics, and another chapter of her life. And she moved here about 5 or 6 years ago, full time. Case Logistics got sold off, and she was doing independent stuff, and just again loved the city. So she actually was spending most of her time here anyway. It became a question of why are we paying for an apartment in San Diego that you're never at. So anyways, her chapters were really distinct. She had the early part of her life where she got out of high school in Seattle, went to college in Seattle for a semester, hated it, moved to LA and became a party doll, bartender at the Rainbow Room, the famous Rainbow Room in Hollywood, and bartender to the stars, and just that was it. She was a full-time party girl. And at some point, she moved back to Seattle. That's when I met her. Wanted to go back to school, and after we got to know each other a little, I suggested she get a paralegal degree. And I said, you're smart, and there's tons of opportunities. Seattle was sort of a boom town, so that started a new stage. And then I got a job at a firm in Sacramento, working on a huge case. It was a litigation support case. And Gayle decided to move down with me. And that firm had a law librarian who became pregnant and took maternity leave, and they wanted a replacement. And I said, well, I know this bright young lady who has a paralegal degree, but she can certainly, fill in for you. She doesn't have a librarian degree. Well, they loved her. She, Gayle took over, and the woman decided not to come back. So that morphed into a full-time job. And then she was, after a couple of years, hired away by another firm in Sacramento, the biggest firm in Sacramento, which wanted her to, her specialty was morphing from the print world to the digital world, culling the collection, deciding what you could get electronically, et cetera, et cetera. And then we both accepted other positions in San Diego. Love San Diego. I took a job with a firm down there, helping them move from an old Syntrex system into the the wonderful world of Novell and also litigation support stuff. Gayle became the librarian for the San Diego office of Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison, until that firm imploded. So she had this chapter where she was a law librarian for a number of years, and she was the president of the legal division of the Special Law Librarians Association, Special Librarians Association, SSL. I don't know, something. But the point is, she had, she was well respected in that phase of things. And then she went from that into marketing. Then she
What year was that? What year was that when she made that switch?
Wow, let's see. So I track everything by our son's age. He was in first grade. We moved to, I took a job with a software company in Dallas, in Fort Worth, and she started doing some marketing for them. So that would have been 94, 95.
Okay.
I was still bouncing around doing a year here, a year there, on cases. And so we were a year or so in Fort Worth, went from there to Fort Lauderdale on a case I did. And then we decided it was time. We were becoming like a quasi-military family. Right. We needed to settle someplace so that we could raise Seamus in a stable environment. We decided, Seattle. Schools were good, cost of living was good, quality of life was excellent, family there, so he would have an extended family of cousins. I know how important that is to you to have a good family structure. So about that, now we're talking like the fourth grade or so 98, 99, late 90s, we moved to Seattle, east side of Seattle, actually. And Seamus, then we stay there until he graduates high school, until 2005.
And was Gayle on her own right then from a marketing perspective?
She was doing independent marketing, but at various times was hired, and it was really interesting. She had sort of a niche because of the stuff she had done first with, I think it was second. First, there was a small startup company in Seattle. She had met somebody, it was an attorney who knew her as a law librarian, but wanted to blow up this company. They were way ahead of their times. It was really sort of a combination document management, knowledge management, web-based thing. He was ahead of his time. So she did that for a few years. Then I believe the next one was Case Logistics, which at the time was based in Tennessee, small company. She helped grow them out, and then they got sold to a company called Anacomp, and that was the San Diego move. Okay. Anacomp was a big back-end database company, mostly in the banking industry. And for some reason, they thought they were going to get rich buying into e-discovery or litigation support. So she was with them for a number of years, and finally they sold to Thomson. And then Gayle started up with another. She was doing small projects, and then she started working with Andy Adkins. You may recall she was doing a company they were trying to bring to market that would grab social media evidence and preserve it. And that it was like the Wright brothers, like they just never got off the ground. They launched it off the dunes and it flew for about 18 feet and came down and didn't crash, just never got the elevation. And then so again, she continued doing individual marketing, and then the last several years, of course, she'd been with Joe Sherman at EDT. Right. EDT. And they really hit it off. That was a good match. But all of that came to a screeching halt with COVID. Joe was actually trapped in Paris when
everything hit.
Yeah, right. And she was like literally couldn't get out of Paris. Oh boy, what a horrible fate! I'm trapped in Paris.
stuck in Paris with just some croissants.
Yeah,
it's rough.
So the point was that she had all these individual stages, and what I learned when she passed, it's always difficult when you're a partner with somebody, you're a spouse with somebody, you're in love with somebody. You of course, you think the world of them, and you think the world revolves around them, or actually, I think the world revolves around me. But she was in the satellite. We had a little contention there about who was revolving around who. But
I don't think it was really a question there. But
no,
keep telling yourself that
the only question was in my mind, and it was
right,
and I was wrong clearly. What I found was, and of course I treasured her and valued her knowledge of the space and her ability to do things. When we did the e-discovery, everybody says, "Oh, the e-discovery channel, that's a great job, Tom." Oh, Gayle did it all. I didn't do anything. All I do is talk, right? She did all the heavy lifting, right. And knew how to market and knew how to approach things and how to get out there. But what I didn't know was how valued she was by how many people in our profession. I've, got literally thousands of messages, emails, and notes, and many hundred of posts on Facebook and LinkedIn, and people are still calling. I got a note this morning from somebody in London. I got a call yesterday from an old friend of hers in Switzerland from her LA days. One of her roommates when she was at the Rainbow Room, and the woman now is living in Switzerland, and people are still here. And what I found was that she was incredibly well respected. People valued her judgment as much as I did, and you're just not always aware of that of your close family and friends when you work together with them. People not only said that they liked her, there was a lot of that, but I was pleasantly surprised by how many people said she had helped them. She had been a mentor, an advisor, that they went to her for advice the same way I did. It shouldn't have been any surprise to me. And people going back to some of those early days. At one point, I forget where it fell in the pantheon. It might have been actually her first job in Seattle. She was basically the office manager, receptionist, web mistress, paralegal for like a 2-person DUI attorney law firm in Bellevue, Washington. Okay. And I heard from them how much they treasured her insight and how she helped pull things together for them. I heard from a woman who was a law librarian who said when she first started in the profession, she met Gayle and how much her insight and advice mattered to her in starting up in her profession. I met dozens of marketers, dozens literally, who said, I could call Gayle and she would give me really good insight about, try this, don't try this, what's your budget, here's how to do this. She really understood.
She was a master of her craft.
Yes, she was really good at it, better even than I knew. And I had a great discussion with Henry Dicker, who had, of course, ran Legal Tech New York for years, and so got to know Gayle very well. And we used to run into each other at that little food place across out the side door of the hotel.
Yep.
Yeah.
Little
Henry
cafe
would be
over there.
Yeah, we would be in there at night because we didn't drink, we didn't go out. Well, actually, it was the pause between the first round of activities, and then Gayle would go out to the clubs where there was going to be a party by, the relativity party or whatever, and dance until 2 a.m. And I would go back to the room and see what was on cable. Taking our old friend Browning's advice that as you get older, he used to say, nothing good happens after 9 o'clock. And then as he got even older, he said, nothing good happens after dessert.
Yeah.
So I would go back, or I would go, as you know, we would go up to the Carnegie Club and smoke cigars and talk. And so I think you saw that side of Gayle. We were at, was it the Georgetown Institute a couple years ago? When we were at the hotel and we went out into that little courtyard, and you and I were smoking cigars, and Gayle was just sitting there talking with us, and we just talked, and she would talk about a wide variety of subjects. You could talk about politics with her. You could talk about it wasn't just music and shoes.
Right. I mean, I thought that, like, one of the most, something that I hadn't realized, I realized about her, but like when she said it, was, we were out there talking that night, and she's like, did you ever see my tattoo on my arm? And I was like, she had a number of tattoos, and yes. I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, take a look at this. And she showed me how she had the wraparound barbed wire with the Hebrew word for remember under it. Yep. And, she's like, you know what? This was just something that I had to do because I felt that it was important. And, she had that serious side to her also. It was like, it was intermingled. She managed to merge the two things together, the thoughtful, serious side of her, with the fun and playful side. But she had that deep understanding of people, of empathy for others. And,
yes.
That just showed
a great story there
so clearly.
Yeah. We had been at the Holocaust Museum, and this is a long time ago. I remember because I don't even remember what we were in DC for, but we had Seamus, and he was about 5 or 6. And I don't know, have you been through the Holocaust Museum?
I have.
They have a children's side. Yeah. Where they have, exhibits that they,
are appropriate,
tailor them so that they won't freak out children. And I remember we took him through, and, he was quite impressed. But as we were leaving, we came up that escalator to go to leave. And there were 2 survivors sitting at a table there talking. And I think there was a book that the museum was selling. And Gayle went over and talked to them. She said, let's go talk to them. And I said, for one of the few times in my life, I'm speechless. I don't know what I would say to these people. What, the enormity of what they went through and what they saw, and to come out of it. But she went over and spent a good 20, 25 minutes speaking with them. And when we came home from that trip is when she got that tattoo. It was I think she had bought the book, and it was actually, there was a piece of art that had the barbed wire with the dove sitting on it. And then she added the Hebrew words for remember. So yeah, things like that would affect her. And if you didn't know her well, that might catch you by surprise. And Henry commented on that too, that, although she was a lot of fun, no denying, there was that side to her, that serious side, that empathetic side.
The insight, also insightful. Like, it wasn't just, it wasn't just that she could listen and nod her head and yeah, I'm hearing you, but also then she had things to give. She had things that she would be
Yep.
able to make you feel better about yourself. So
Yes.
it was.
And that's what I got from people as they were reaching out, was so a story about the week that she passed. Her sister, she was planning a surprise birthday party for me. My birthday was like 3 days later, and she was planning a big surprise birthday party. In typical Gayle fashion, she basically told a bunch of people we're going to have a party. She didn't really plan it.
Right,
It was just
show up and we'll party.
Yeah, we're going to have a party. Well, her sister and her sister's husband had just retired recently in Seattle. They had bought an RV and they were driving around the country camping. And so they said, "Oh, great! We've never seen New Orleans. We'll come down." So, they got the horrible news as they were only about 6 hours out of the city, but they were sitting in front of her apartment at night, and they said they looked up and they're just on camp chairs out there smoking cigarettes and having some coffee or a beer or whatever. And Kit, her sister, said, I realized there's like 25 people standing in front of us, and it's the neighbors, who had seen stuff going on and had heard. They talked to each other and who were basically said, well, you got to have a remembrance for Gayle. It's New Orleans. Her house is about a half a block from, it's called the Bayou St. John. It's an old inland waterway that was used by the Native Americans between Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi River. They said, you got to have a remembrance and have Tom say a few words and, throw some of her ashes in the bayou, and kids, her sister's looking around like most of these people don't even really know her.
Right.
The woman across the street, who was like 90 years old, left a handwritten note saying, "I only ever saw Gayle to wave to and exchange words, but her spirit always perked me up in the morning. I put a smile on my face seeing Gayle out there smoking a cigarette and having coffee." And as we're talking about that, a UPS truck pulls up and the guy delivers something next door. He comes over and says, "I was really sorry to hear about Miss Gayle." Right?
Wow. Yeah.
2 days later, there's a knock on the door. I'm at her place. There's a knock on the door. A guy is passing out flyers that they're going to be filming an episode of CSI New Orleans 2 houses down later that week. And they're just letting the neighbors know and blah, blah, blah. And I had parked her motorcycle out front with a picture of her on the windshield, and people were leaving flowers. And he said, what's with the motorcycle? That picture, that woman looks familiar. And I said, "Oh, that's Miss Gayle. She lived here, but she died last week, unfortunately." He goes, "Gayle, yeah, Gayle, the motorcycle. I know her." He said, "I've been here for about 6 years. I'm from St. Louis, but I came down to help film on Treme, and now we're doing CSI." He said she was an extra in some bar when there was a bar scene with a band.
Really?
Gayle would always sign up to be one of the extras, dancing in the front of something. He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "I bet I met her 8 times in the last 12 months,
Wow.
filming these little scenes." And so her sister turns to me and said, "Did Gayle know everybody in New Orleans?" I said, "Well, yeah, well, she didn't know them. They probably weren't worth knowing." People were driving by and stopping to say something. That's just, her brother said at one point, Gayle never met a stranger. To your point about understanding people and really feeling about them. She would meet somebody and they would become a friend. And even if it was a 2 or 3 minute meeting, they would,
yeah,
she would touch them.
I wasn't surprised, but reading, some of the comments on Facebook and things like that, you saw just how many people were like, yeah, I only had an opportunity to meet her once, or I only, met her in passing, but I still felt she just had that way of making you feel like you were someone, you mattered.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And those people, especially because she was such a social media maven. I mean, she was one of the early promoters of guerrilla marketing, she called it. You know, yeah, you're a startup, you don't have a lot of money. We can't compete against a Lexus or a Microsoft or a Relativity, but there's ways around that. You know, there's millions of people out there on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and we're gonna use that to get your company out there. But then people would ask her advice on those media, and she would always answer. She always had time to answer somebody's question and say, do this, do that, try this, try that. Yep. But, you know, saying that reminds me, I made a note that said the chapters, the different styles. One of her best friends here in New Orleans actually was a friend of hers in the biker community in San Diego and moved here because her mother got ill about a year after Gayle did. So they remained good friends. And she said they would go out, you know, get the motorcycles out, go to a club, listen to a band, dance. And the woman would say to her, well, Gayle, you know, what did you do today? Well, you know, I had to do a webinar. Or I was on this call. Or, well, you know, what do you do? And Gayle would go, hey, I'm off duty. Right. I'm punched out. Right. We're here to listen to this band. We're here to, you know, to get gumbo.
Yep. Take the time,
I don't want to talk about that.
For yourself.
That's right. That part of my day ended at 5 o'clock. There was a great picture of Jimmy Buffett a number of years ago. He was at Jazz Fest. He had actually flown his private plane in because there's a particular gumbo that's sold at the fest. Jazz Fest is about food as well as music, and there's like a pheasant, quail, duck gumbo that he loved. And some reporter comes walking through the food lines and he notices there's Jimmy Buffett in line to get some gumbo, but he's not playing at the Jazz Fest that year. And the guy goes up and says, Jimmy Buffett? And he goes, yeah. Well, what are you doing here? He says, buying gumbo.
Gumbo, right, come on.
And the guy says, well, can I ask you a few questions? And he goes, nope, I'm off duty. You can take a picture, but I ain't talking about anything except gumbo. Yeah. I flew in, and he walks away with 2 big bags. You know, he got them for, you know, he's playing in Cincinnati or someplace.
Right.
And flew in and goes back with the gumbo from Jazz Fest. You know, Gayle was, you know, aware of that sort of social media exposure and what it would do. So I wanted to thank some people who were in some of those different buckets. In our bucket, in the professional, you know, Bob Ambrosi wrote a wonderful accounting of her. We knew Bob for years and years, going back to his days working with Monica Bay. And then Craig Ball, of course, who's a great friend, wrote a wonderful piece. Joe Sherman
is a stand-in to get arrested in case the police busted up the second line.
He didn't know that, of course.
Oh, he didn't know that. Sorry. No, I'm giving away secrets.
Yeah. So, and you know, that was so funny because if you look at that video, you'll see that Glenn, we put it on private property so that we weren't running afoul of the permit issue. Glenn was up on the balcony over Gayle's apartment. And he comes down the stairs and you can hear him say, everybody follow the band. He just said, to hell with it. We're doing a second line, right? He was a person who had met Gayle in as we call it, the club. And she had offered him some advice about sobriety and dealing with issues. Because, you know, no matter how long you're sober, it's still a struggle. And you're up, you're down, you're tempted. And especially if you're a musician, it must be awful. Right. So he just said, you know what? We're doing a second line. I don't care if they arrest me. Let them arrest me. Right. So he just, let's go. Everybody, let's follow the band. And we did.
Put Craig up front. So
yeah. Yeah. So then Joe Sherman did a Zoom meeting the day before that, where a bunch of people got online. Well, you were on that. Weren't you and Jimmy on that? Yeah.
Yep,
yeah. Thank you so much. And then Ari Kaplan did one about a week ago. For a whole bunch of the ACEDS people. He did, you know, he does his noon get together. The Gayle was just a religious attendee of. She loved it because it kept her in touch with everybody in the COVID environment. And Ari did a nice thing for her. That was wonderful. And then at the remembrance, you know, at the second line, Dave Glynn came down from Chicago. He flew in. Joy Morrow flew out from LA and both of them were just great help to me because I was a basket case, and you know they were able to not just give me some emotional support, but help do some. Dave went and picked up the barbecue. You know,
important. Yep.
And Craig Ball, of course, was handling things. You know, he was the major domo. But then there's the biker community, and when she lived in San Diego, she was very active in the biker community out there. The as they like to say, the non how do we put it, the good bikers, the ones who are not considered the one percenters. You know, she was actually a member of an all-female motorcycle club called the Graveyard Gamblers. And I heard from Terry Jacobs, who was the president of that club, which was really sweet. And I heard from the presidents of several clubs out there. You know, she was friends with wives, female members, etc. But Snowman, who was the head of the president of the Booze Fighters Club out there, was a good friend of hers. Bruiser, who was the president of the Grifters. Several of her good friends were in the Grifters for a while, and then a particularly good friend of hers, Road Rage, who's the president of the Violators. He sent me a really touching note, and you know, again, people who you wouldn't think would, you know, remember her that well, or she's just one of 500 people at a party. They all remembered her. And then her friend, I mentioned her friend who moved out here, Lorraine Arejo, probably butchered that name, but Lorraine is a good friend of hers. And then locally, Renee Harnell is the writer of Thunder Roads magazine, which is a big thing. She did a biker tribute for Gayle at a club the day after our neighborhood thing, and they're taking a whole bunch of her clothes. They're going to auction them off, and we're giving the money to Grace House, which is a local recovery home for women only in recovery. And then, of course, last but not least, the family and friends. We talked about people who are here: her sister Kit and Dave, her brother Michael, and Dave Glynn and Joy Morrow and Craig Ball. Too many people for me to even remember. And I apologize to everybody I haven't responded to, because there's just been so many of you, and it's been, helter skelter. Our son Seamus, who was really great. I actually saw at the party on Saturday, her brother was kind of tearing up because we had some pictures of her out. I saw my son walk up to her brother and ask him how he was doing, and I'm thinking, geez, this is his mom that just died.
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, he quite luckily got her personality.
Right.
The boy will go. The boy will do well with Gayle's
you.
personality and looks, I might add. So yeah, he came through that doing all right. And of course, the city of New Orleans, the neighborhood, the culture, the music. Glenn David Andrews, the musician who played and did such a wonderful job. I mean, that's all very heartfelt. We talked earlier about music lifts the spirits. The whole idea of a second line was to, come behind a band at a funeral and play uplifting music and celebrate the people's lives in a way that, I told you the family was a little worried. They weren't quite sure what to expect there. But once they saw it in person, and you can't describe it, I urge everybody who hasn't seen the video to contact me, and Dave posted it on YouTube, so we can get you the link. I think you probably saw, as you're going through the neighborhood, people are coming out on their porches. People are joining the second line, just parading. It is a celebration of life. And the culture of New Orleans, which is about life and food and music and community, that sense of community. So it was really something. It exceeded my expectations. I thought it would be good, but it exceeded my expectations.
And I think, it was appropriate because music was such a huge part of her life. In every way, every story she told involved some musicians. I was sitting in a bar listening to, like, she know exactly what song she was listening to. 1974. So,
although we had a terrible fight early on in our relationship, she was convinced that Twist and Shout was done originally by the Beatles. And I said to her, no, that was, respectfully, honey, that was the Isley Brothers did the first version. No, the Beatles that's a Beatles song. I said, well, it is a Beatles song, but it's a cover.
Yep.
And she not only didn't want to admit that she was wrong, but wouldn't admit that she was wrong for about 6 months.
But she
In fact,
did right.
the picture behind me is us dancing at Jazz Fest to Van Morrison, to Brown Eyed Girl, which is one of our songs.
Yep.
And as my good friend, her good friend as well, John Dunn. I told John when we get down to all the Gayle clothes, the vibrant outfit, I said, actually, I'm taking them and bringing them down to your store, and you have to buy them back because you've sold her most of those clothes.
Right.
John said, Gayle's spirit that spirit that Springsteen kind of referenced. He said, that spirit's going to stay in New Orleans until there's another jazz fest. She was so in tune with fest, and I would do the crawfish out front, and people would come from all over the world. And we had people as diverse as Craig Ball and Judge Grimm out front eating crawfish too.
Yep.
Folks from St. Louis, from Paris, from Morocco, a whole group of women who she got to be friends with from Canada who came down. I mean, it was just remarkable. And so my friend said, John said, till you sprinkle her ashes in front of the main stage at the next Jazz Fest, she's not going to rest. She'll be bugging you. So we're going to do another. We're going to do a real second line at the next Jazz Fest. I'm going to go and get a permit, and we'll have a big brass band, and
looking forward.
We'll send her off again in style because she did love me. You're right. Music was the hardest part of COVID for her. We get so used here in New Orleans to, I had a bad day. Hell with it. I'm going to go down to Frenchman Street, little street outside the quarter, where there's about 10 clubs, and just listen to music for a couple hours.
Yeah.
I'm not making a night of it or anything. I'm just going down to listen to
it.
Yeah, 7 nights a week you could go to dozens of clubs and hear music, not to mention stuff on street corners and in your neighborhood. And
right.
Somebody said once, I think it was Ben Jaffe, who owns the Preservation Hall. His parents founded it, and he runs it now. He said, the great thing about New Orleans is I leave my window open and I go to sleep listening to music, and I wake up listening to music.
Yep.
Music is a rhythm of the city, so that bugged her, I think, more than anything else.
She was a part of it.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Well, Tom, thank you for telling us a little bit more about her, and having the opportunity to remember Gayle. And I think before
having me.
We've got 2 minutes left, but let me ask you.
Yes.
If she was a guest here and we had to ask her, who would she have wanted to spend a day with?
Bruce Springsteen.
That's easy enough.
In our business.
Okay.
If she could spend a day with anybody, it would be the boss. Absolutely. Be the boss. Yep.
Did she ever have an opportunity to meet him?
No. Never got to talk to him. Got to meet several other people, and a whole other host of stories we can tell about people she met. Front row at the last shows at the old Giant Stadium, Meadowlands Stadium.
Okay.
She went. We were at Legal Tech, and they were doing shows, and she jumped on the train and rolled over, and got herself a ticket from somebody out front, and next thing you know, she was up front, like waving to Bruce, but never got to have a conversation with him. She would have loved to have talked to him, and she would have talked to him about music. I mean, they would have had a good discussion. Yeah, that would have been fun to be a fly on the wall for that talk.
Absolutely. Well, okay. Well, until we meet again and get to our regularly scheduled programming with our next guest. But thank you for taking this time, and we will see everyone later on the eDiscovery channel.
Thanks so much, Rocky. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.